This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And if tonight was the kind of night that you did not have your televisions on, you were not streaming it from your phone or your tablets regarding NBA draft night for 2016, aside from the obvious of the 76ers selecting Ben Simmons, you could not find a louder volume of hype being brought about with some of the things that have happened through the course of this evening, even to the very end when Ben Batil came up on the podium with probably one of the craziest looking outfits I've ever seen. I mean, this night spoke in volumes. And what an exciting night that has turned out to be. A lot of guys now have an opportunity to take that step forward to live out their fantasy of being a pro NBA. But more importantly, man, we get to live out our fantasy, reliving and rehashing some of the things that have gone down, the selections made, and some of the moves that were made through the course of the night. And to discuss all of these things, you know I got to do with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Dime Man contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna and PNC. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Man, I wasn't too sure, bro, but you know, did you toss your phone in disgust or in utter confusion after what's transpired tonight?
Well, first of all, salute to all the fans and listeners of the NBA Baseline as we discuss the NBA draft recap, if you will. And how about Ben Batil getting the first shout out of the draft recap as opposed to any other names that were out there? But yeah, man.
If you saw my man's suit.
I did.
That's not even shout outs, bro. That's screaming. Too.
He was like, what?
Even had Jay Billis stuck, my brother. Had Jay Billis, he couldn't even finish his train of thought after Ben walked up on the podium with that getup that he had on him, man.
Yeah,
crazy.
That was something, especially in the wee hours late into the second round there. But if you follow me on Twitter, let me apologize. If you were following along for my fandom that took over. As the Boston Celtics, you got a grade F in this NBA draft. If I was giving them a grade,
you're not talking about the grade F for like the term F like you get on a report card. It's probably meaning something else.
Yeah,
of your emotional state.
I have some expletives that I'd love to share, but we're gonna go ahead and move on. But as we put back on my podcaster and media hat. And truly try to evaluate this draft as we go through here. A lot of interesting moves. And I think it really starts with some of the things that happened, pre-draft, if you will, in the days leading up to it here, as some guys and some teams were moved around and made some made a couple of shakeups to really set themselves up for the 2016-2017 season.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to get into those in a couple of moments. And then obviously we'll give our breakdown and assessment of the first two rounds of the NBA draft and, who were the winners, who were the losers. And the thing that I think we need to make sure that people understand is that we're talking about this from the perspective of how this is going to impact teams moving forward. We're not here to make predictions about whether or not guys are expected to be successful in the NBA, because that's going to be for a later date. But what I think is important is did some of these teams address their needs? And one of the things that we talked about, and even what we had our guests on our previous show, Ed Isaacson from NBADraftBlog.com, who does an excellent work scouting, analyzing the upcoming talent for this draft that just passed, is how much of this draft was going to be predicated on what teams do outside of the draft itself, or is it going to be a focal point on the guys that they select? Will these guys that are being selected meet the needs for some of these teams that were either playoff bound or teams that have been a part of a rebuilding process? And so now we have had opportunity to look at this in totality, and we can clearly see some teams recognize where they stand when it comes to being a part of the draft, having opportunity to select in the draft. And now we're also seeing that teams are not going to wait for these guys that are being drafted to help teams along, that some of them have already recognized the writing on the wall. And to me, the one that stands out more than anything is the move that the New York Knicks have made prior to the draft, trading Jalen Rose to from the Chicago Bulls, taking
Derrick
him from,
Rose?
I'm sorry, Jalen Rose, because my man Jalen was out there tonight. My apologies, but Derrick Rose coming from the Chicago Bulls to the New York Knicks. The Bulls also gave away Justin Holiday, which I find is a very interesting throw-in to that trade. And Shaw, the fact that the Knicks decide to make this play, it's interesting because I didn't realize the number of point guards that would actually be available in this upcoming draft. And you clearly can see Phil Jackson, Steve Mills. These guys are not looking to develop their talent. They tried that with Jerry Grant. They don't have the patience for it. They want an instant playmaker. And if healthy, Derrick Rose coming to the New York Knicks automatically puts that in play for the Knicks to be significantly better offensively when you look at what they got from their backcourt this past season.
Yeah, I think for the Knicks going into this, this was about, as you said, shoring up that backcourt and well, not even shoring it up, getting anybody that could actually play on a regular basis. And Rose on the final year of his deal should be obviously trying to stay healthy, as any NBA player would, but more importantly, trying to reestablish himself as one of the league's most dominant point guards. This really helps the Knicks get their guy, if you will, pair somebody up alongside Carmelo and give them a ball distributor who can get Porzingis the ball. They still have some holes to fill now. As Aaron Aflalo, Derek Williams opted out of their contract, and I mean, I know we're only talking about Aaron Aflalo and Derek Williams, but those are rotation guys for them. And they played the 2, and then Williams played some of the 3 and the 4. They gave up Robin Lopez, was a really nice piece for them last year, and probably their best asset outside of Porzingis. That was tradable. So now they have a big hole in the center that they also need to fill as well too. There's a lot of rumors about what they're going to do with that because they have some cap space. Will they get a Noah? Will they get a Gasol or whatever? But keeping the conversation centered here, Derrick Rose is an acceptable risk, I think, for the New York Knicks, and I think everybody out there is really excited about that to see what he can do with Carmelo Anthony.
And more importantly, Shaw, not only is it an acceptable risk, it is a risk that you have to take at this particular juncture, given the window that you have with Carmelo Anthony. And ultimately, you have to make a decision. Derrick Rose is still 27 years old. If Derrick Rose can show you that he can stay healthy and can even be, let's just say 60% of the Derrick Rose that was a former MVP, you clearly are now taking a lot of the offensive pressure, and you're taking a lot of the pressure that was bestowed upon Carmelo Anthony and also Kristaps Porzingis. You're buying time for Porzingis to continue to come into his own. And at the same time, I think you're also establishing a culture where winning should now be the mantra again for the New York Knicks. I know people in the Knicks fan base are about this instant gratification, but you have to be realistic in what this Knicks team has gone through since they lost Woodson as being the head coach, and since the turmoil having Derek Fisher as the head coach. I think now you have to start looking at these guys and saying, hey, let's be a successful basketball team and then start from there. Also keep in mind too, now that you've got Justin Holiday, you've got Tony Roten on the books. This is
They waived Rose. Yeah,
they waived. Okay,
yeah, they waived to get Rose.
Awesome, great. Yeah, okay, just so when I'm wanting to start to praise Mills and Jackson, then they do something that makes me scratch my head. I don't know whether or not they should be quick to do something like that, Shaw. But to me, I still think that it's an upgrade for that backcourt, which is absolutely necessary in this Eastern Conference. You need a guy who is battle tested and that can help put a dynamic, fold around that team, start getting them to score the basketball a little bit more aggressively, a little bit more efficiently than what they were getting previously before.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing about this for me is really that they're going to give Hornacek an opportunity to be successful immediately. The New York fan base is obviously very fickle. They're very demanding, and they want to see this team get back into the playoff hunt and really be contenders out there. And Rose gives them an opportunity to do that. Not saying that's going to happen, but it gives them the opportunity. And I like that aspect of it more than anything else, because now Hornacek is going to have some horses to go out there with. Porzingis, Melo, and Rose is a nice trio to have in the Eastern Conference specifically, even in that Atlantic Division. If they can fill in the holes at the 2 and at the center position, this will be a very, very competitive team.
Definitely. All right, Shaw. So aside from the New York Knicks shaking up the headlines a little bit, even though the trade that happened beforehand, the Indiana Pacers getting Jeff Teague from Atlanta, And you knew that once that had occurred, George Hill was no longer going to be a part of the picture. I believe George Hill goes to the Utah Jazz. What do you make about that particular move? Because I found it very interesting that this is an opportunity for Jeff Teague to be in a situation where the Indiana Pacers ultimately found themselves in the playoffs last year. He's playing next to a proverbial MVP type player in Paul George, who after a year coming off of the horrific injury, this is a playmaker that he can clearly feed off of. And the pressure doesn't have to be on Jeff Teague to be a playmaker as much as he can be a play creator. He can help up that tempo a little bit, that quote unquote Larry Bird didn't think he was getting from Coach Vogel that he now expects to be getting from Nate McMillan. But you got to like this move for Indiana because now it frees up the priority that they made during this NBA draft this past evening.
Yeah, for the Indiana Pacers, here's my thing. Listen, I like Frank Vogel as a head coach. I like Larry Bird as a general manager for the most part. But the two didn't mesh, and then Bird said he wanted him to play faster, just with whatever roster that he threw out there last year. Now here comes they fire Vogel, and they give Nate McMillan, ironically, a roster in which he's going to be able to play faster. I mean, these are now acceptable pieces. Trading George Hill and getting him out of there and sending him to Utah for basically the 12th pick, if you will. So Utah's happy they get a point guard or whatever. Atlanta gets the 12th pick, and Indiana gets Jeff Teague. Then later on the day of the draft, the Pacers trade whatever, I think it was the 20th pick to the Brooklyn Nets to get Thaddeus Young. Thaddeus Young, a now versatile small forward, power forward who can run up and down the floor. So now they have the pieces in essence where they can play up and down. And for me, it's just a year late in terms of what their philosophy was. Because I think if you would have had Frank Vogel has this team with Jeff Teague, Paul George, Miles Turner now even, and Thaddeus Young as the core and crux of his roster, Vogel would have been able to do the things that Bird wanted to do. Well, whatever, whatever the saying is, $1 short, a year late, whatever. And that's kind of where we're at now. But for overall, I like what the Pacers have done, especially for the direction in which they want to go.
All right, Sean. Now, finally, I know that you've been chomping at the bit at this one. And I believe that this particular trade really shook up everything that led in aside from the obvious, which was the 76ers with their number one pick, overall pick, and the Lakers then going with their number two, with their pick at number 2. The Oklahoma City Thunder, in an unprecedented move leading up to the NBA draft, they moved Serge Ibaka to the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic give up Victor Oladipo, Ersan Ilyasova, and when we look at this, we'll get into the actual crux of the deal. But Shaw, I'm gonna open up the floor to you, man, because you've had a lot to say about it. I know I have my personal feelings about it, but I think yours has a little more substance in it, where you can really give people a perspective that I don't think most people are expecting as to who won and who really lost out on this particular trade when you look at it, these three dynamic pieces ultimately being moved prior to the draft.
Well, anytime you see a 3-for-1 trade, you kind of raise your eyebrows. But, in this situation, Ibaka gets moved from Orlando, on draft night. Moves from OKC to Orlando on draft night for Victor Oladipo, the top 5 pick just a few seasons ago. Ersan Ilyasova, an acceptable stretch 4 who can play the 3 at times as well too. And then number 11 pick, which ends up being Domantas Sabonis, a guy who's also going to be able to stretch the floor at the 4 position, but can definitely rebound and help OKC. They got 3 guys that are coming there and be more than rotation players. They're going to be key contributors, and especially in the case of Oladipo, he's going to be there now. You're thinking about a backcourt of Westbrook and Oladipo together. That really can be a defensive-minded backcourt without having now Roberson out there who can't hit a shot or can't do anything from a playmaking standpoint. The flip side to that, too, is now that shows Durant, or you're hoping it shows Durant, that, hey, you're very serious. And at least in this last year, you're going to be very, very committed to winning and potentially getting out of the Western Conference and reaching the NBA Finals. The caveat to all of that, though, is it may not convince Durant. And I think what Presti was trying to do in this situation is, let's say, Durant leaves this year, then it's Westbrook and Oladipo, and Westbrook decides to leave next year. Ibaka was going to be a free agent next year as well. Oladipo is now the piece in this sense that they can try to build around, along with the number 11 pick in Sabonis, and Steven Adams there as well, too, at the center. And I think he feels like, well, you know what? If all else fails, Oladipo will be here at least for the next few seasons, and I can try to build around that if it all falls apart. Again, we'll see what happens, but I like this deal from OKC because I think they're trying to cover up and do a little bit of insurance as well as trying to keep Durant for next season.
And what's your perspective for the Orlando Magic?
Yeah, the Ibaka trade for them. I mean, I've been saying this for a while since Vogel had his press conference in Orlando. He's saying, "Listen, we need to add veterans. We need to add veterans." I didn't think it was going to come at the expense of Oladipo. I thought maybe Vucevic might go, but or maybe even Aaron Gordon, maybe Nelford Payton. I just didn't think it would be Oladipo. Ibaka comes there now. He's going to try to shore up that defense as well. Be a rebounder and be a guy who can hopefully hit a couple of jumpers and space the floor for Vucevic. As Vucevic tries to play a little bit more back to the basket, and that's not really the greatest. He's not the greatest at it, but he's probably going to have to learn that role a little bit better with Vogel. And I think he can help that. I don't like this move for how much they gave up. Oladipo and the 11 pick as well as Ilyasova. I mean, Ilyasova really is a throw-in. But I just feel like Orlando really is going kind of balls to the wall here now with Ibaka at the 4 position. I still think some other trades are going to happen in Orlando, but I still think it's a little bit curious just for the amount of players they had to give up to get Ibaka over there.
Well, look, first things first for me, and we talked about this before we jumped on our show, and this is just my personal feeling, but even though you brought up some very valid point, which is exactly the reason why I wanted you to jump in first, because I wanted you to lay the foundation in the understanding of it, because I get where you're coming from, and I don't disagree one bit. I can clearly see where Presti is trying to go with this and how much of this could be an advantage for the Oklahoma City Thunder. You also take into consideration that this is exactly what Presti did when it came to James Harden. So you knew that you had to get something for someone that you're probably not going to be able to keep if he becomes a free agent come next year. So I completely get that. And then the other caveat of this whole point is I think Ibaka's course, the Ibaka, Westbrook, Durant experience has run its course. I feel like something had to happen. You had to shake up something, given what has transpired with this team. And ultimately, this is a team dynamically that's going to be offensively better. And somehow it's gotten offensively better without Ibaka even contributing anything. Then he's taken a step back defensively. So, I mean, really, what purpose does he serve playing at the 4 position? You can definitely upgrade. So I get that. And to me, I thought that was somewhat the premise. I thought that if they were going to upgrade, they were going to upgrade their front court to have a more offensive presence so that the load wasn't going to be burdened by just Durant and just by Westbrook. By them getting Oladipo, while I think Oladipo is a dynamic player, and maybe Presti is hedging his bets by doing this, I still wonder how this is going to work, because even in Orlando, part of the reason why Oladipo and the Peyton wasn't working was because of the fact that Oladipo is a ball-dominant guard. And if Westbrook is already a ball-dominant guard, I'm just wondering how Donovan is going to fit Oladipo to help contribute in that kind of manner. I get where he is an upgrade, a serious upgrade over Roberson. But we're talking about 2 extremes of players and what they can do for a team that's already a contender in the Oklahoma City Thunder. I just don't think you needed to make that drastic of a change unless you are definitely afraid of the fact that you don't think that you're going to be able to keep one or the other guy. So I get it. I understand it. I just wonder, is Oladipo the right person in this situation, given the circumstances and the stakes that are being raised? And if you're going to sell Oklahoma City Thunder fans on this, I hope it's with the premise that Donovan knows what to do with Oladipo to maintain the type of potential that Oladipo was supposed to bring for Orlando that he didn't get an opportunity to bring, that he is being asked to give, I guess, to an Oklahoma City Thunder team that was 1 game away from finding themselves playing in the NBA Finals.
Yeah, well, I think with Oladipo in Orlando, he didn't necessarily feel like he needed to defer to, I think, some of the other guys that were on the roster. He is a high-character guy. He's a good individual. But I think now going to OKC and going in that situation and potentially playing with Westbrook and Durant, I think he's going to fit a role and understand that, at least for right now, hey, you know what? I've got to help these guys win. And my calling card is going to be defense and to make shots, when they come my way. And the fact that, again, they got Sabonis too, as the 11 pick, for Ibaka, who we all think has lost value. So that's my thing. It's just like, well, what was Orlando thinking in terms of, the guys that they gave up, for Ibaka? Because Ibaka's, he's good. He's a solid player. He can help, but it's like he's the piece you add when you're like 1 piece away. Orlando isn't 1 piece away. And I guess you need to start building one or the other. But that's, to me, where I feel like, okay, it was a really acceptable, not even risk. I think it was just a good move for OKC But we'll wait and see, and, as you brought up some points offline in terms of Oladipo, he is going to have to be kind of more of a spot up shooter. He will be able to play at the point guard at times when Russ gets out or gets in foul trouble or anything like that. But he's going to have to learn how to play a little bit differently, and that is a lot to ask. And Billy Donovan's going to have his share of work to do with him. But so be it, man. Let's see what happens.
Most definitely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This is our 2016 NBA draft post discussion as the draft, first 2 rounds of the draft have ended. Interesting stuff happening already before we even get into the draft, Shaw. I mean, we already gone almost 20 minutes into this show discussing the things that have led up to us discussing to draft. And so let's get right into it. I mean, look, everybody, I think, and their grandmother and grandmother's grandmother knew, even, Philadelphia 76ers greats who probably lost their hearing and their eyesight because of the incessant losing that this basketball organization and team has suffered over the last few years, knew that Ben Simmons was going to be the number 1 pick for the Philadelphia 76ers. What I find interesting, Shaw, is how highly they are toting Ben Simmons in saying, you knew that this was going to happen. The 76ers clearly have now a face for this franchise. Are we really buying into? I know that Ben Simmons has been uber impressive, in the private workouts. I know that there's been a lot of talk about this guy's athleticism and what he's capable of bringing to the table. But man, weren't we doing this just a year ago with Jahlil Okafor in some senses? Like, I understand it because of Simmons' versatility, LeBron-like type, athleticism. But I mean, damn, man, this is the second year in a row we're talking about how the 76ers finally have a face to their franchise. How many faces can this team and this organization finally have with Ben? Are they really getting it right this time by doing it?
Well, I mean, they hope so. And I think Simmons, because of his overall talent and, it's easier to market, guys who are wing players, if you will. I mean, he's being listed as a power forward, or if you will, I mean, he's probably more of a small forward. Either way, it's just easier to market some of those guys as opposed to big men. Last big men to really be marketed on a high level, I can think of is really Shaquille O'Neal. Where it was just like, okay, the face of the franchise and everybody loved what he was able to do. He was able to get the commercials. And I think Simmons is going to be able to get that. Or he has a Foot Locker spot going and then that whole night. But don't want to spend too much time on that aspect, because I think you are right. With Okafor, with Embiid, with Noel, all those bigs, if you will, none of them really have that face of the franchise, even in terms of their mentality as well. Simmons just has a star-like personality about him. Okafor is from the Tim Duncan school, where he doesn't really want to be bothered, doesn't really like the media, if you will. And Noel, just quite frankly, isn't dynamic enough, in what he brings to the game, on the floor. So I think, for them, that's why they're marketing Simmons as the face of the franchise. But Philadelphia had a very good draft overall, getting Luwawu later on, and then also nabbing Korkmaz, the other shooter from Turkey. I think they did a great job with their draft. Yes, there's some conversations that they were trying to move and get the 3 spot, potentially get Chris Dunn. But between Simmons, Luwawu, and Korkmaz, they did a really good job in this. And I think, we're going to see Philadelphia continue to make moves, because they still have to get rid of one of those bigs. And that's probably going to net them a point guard in sometime over the summer.
All right, Shaw, quickly, let's go ahead and forge ahead regarding the Los Angeles Lakers. So if Ben Simmons obviously went as number 1, that would mean that Brandon Ingram was going to be taken at number 2 for the Los Angeles Lakers. And we had Ed Isaacson on our show previously before. He said, listen, after Ingram and Simmons, it's basically a toss-up. So you knew that the Lakers are going to wind up getting this guy. I wonder about this a little bit, just simply because, again, you're buying time, obviously, with Luke Walton. Is there really that dynamic of an upside with the Lakers having Brandon Ingram? Can he instantly be a guy that can come in and have a successful impact on a team that is going to be struggling to find a face, to find an identity for themselves, not just for someone to replace Kobe Bryant? Forget all of that. I'm just saying, find somebody that is willing to shoulder being a Laker and forge this organization, this team ahead, back to the premise of what they used to be, which is going in there and winning basketball games and endearing the fans and showing them that basketball is fun, and it's just not from the team that's playing in the red and white. That used to be their sisterling is now their brotherlings, over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know if Ingram is that guy. I don't know if he's a franchise-changing type player. I don't buy the whole Durant comparisons and all of that. I think he's, going to be less than that. Not to say that he's not going to be a good player. It's just, I think that's just very, very lofty to put that on somebody. And if he was, then yeah, he would be a franchise changing player. But the issue for me with the Lakers is that they still have other guys there who want to prove themselves. So how does this young core truly mesh? Luke Walton's going to have one hell of a job. You look at a situation like Minnesota where they have a lot of young guys, who are messing. But I think Karl Anthony Towns came out there and has established himself that he is the dude. You know what I mean? Andrew Wiggins is, hey, you're number two. You have to take a back seat. I think with the Lakers, you have to find that out. Is Brandon Ingram going to be that guy? Because D'Angelo Russell is obviously still there, and he wants to improve on his going his second season. Julius Randle really now in his third season, really second season of actually playing. He's going to want to get some touches and prove that he's a guy too. So Lakers have some egos that they're going to have to manage, and it'll be interesting to see what Walton does. Trying to get all those guys on the same page.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we do our discussion covering the NBA draft 2016. Interesting things that have already transpired, Shaw. All right, let's go ahead and move right into, the money pick, the money ball pick. And that's regarding, the Boston Celtics. And much has been talked about Danny Ainge and the emphasis that he needs to do something. Either he needs to get the pick right or he needs to figure out a way to get out of that third pick and actually use that pick as a means for them to bolster this basketball team that found themselves second in the Atlantic Division. They participated in the second year in a row in the playoffs, got knocked out in the first round, unfortunately. So when you look at this situation and you look at what's transpired and all the hype that was motivated, but the Nets basically giving up the house, the Boston Celtics select Jaylen Brown. And listen, you, me, everybody is absolutely just floored and scratching their head. What was Ainge and the Celtics thinking by making this particular pick? No one saw this one coming, and it didn't make any sense, even if we wanted to.
Yeah, Ainge basically, he likes Brown, and that's all there is to it. As a general manager, and as a person who's evaluating talent, you're entitled to your opinion. And Danny Ainge, he just likes Jaylen Brown. They were trying to shop that pick. Lots of rumors out there. We just talked about Philadelphia. Apparently, Philly offered Boston Noel 24 and 26, I think, for the third pick, and maybe Boston 16, I think it was. I think they were just trying to get something better than that. Then they were in conversations with Chicago, trying to get Jimmy Butler away from them. One report has, Chicago wanted Jay Crowder, the number 3, and that would have been enough for Butler. Another one says, well, no, the Bulls were trying to rape Boston and trying to get 3, 16, 23, Smart, Bradley, and Crowder for Butler, which would have been absolutely insane, and next year's Brooklyn pick in 2017. So if that was the case, you can see why Boston didn't do it. But Jaylen Brown, to me, I guess, is their Jimmy Butler light, if you will, somebody who they think can work hard like Butler did, and maybe get to that type of level at some point. I'm not enamored with the pick, from a Boston standpoint.
Oh, you're just being kind when using the word enamored.
No, I'm not. I'm not being kind, because I think what it boils down to is I just, when you go back now, you want to be reactive, and then you see stuff, other reports come out. It's like, okay, well, if that's what it was, then you kind of understand. My issue really is that I feel like Chris Dunn or even Bender would have given you some flexibility down the line, even into the summer.
Forget flexibility. Would have given you value. My problem is that the Boston Celtics again select another player who you just basically load up and underneath that depth chart. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you've already got Jay Crowder, you've got James Young, you've got a couple of other guys that could play the 3 position easily. If Jaylen Brown does not see any kind of playing time and he's a first round pick, what value is he going to be for you to move if you actually have to move him? At least if you're going to get someone who is viable amongst other teams that would want the player, like Dragan Bender. There was a high assessment being made for what he can bring to the table. If you drafted him and you knew that you probably weren't going to be able to keep him, or you couldn't get him on your rotation and your roster to play under Stevens, then at least if you move him, he is a viable piece. Chris Dunn, another person. I mean, my thing is that if you're going to go overkill on a player that has value down the road to give up, even if you cannot play the guy the way that you would want to showcase him if he becomes trade bait.
Right. And the flip side, I had some arguments on Twitter. It was like, oh, if you draft him, then what happens? Because then people know you need to move him when it comes to done because you have too many guards. So then people are going to try to take you over the railings, if you will, and give you a beat down, when it comes to the trade conversation. And I get that, but I just feel like you want to be in the best position to potentially negotiate and done, especially for what Minnesota really wanted him badly, and obviously ultimately ended up getting him. And Philadelphia wanted him really badly, and I just feel like.
And neither of these teams had to work to do that because and I'm not saying, listen, the Celtics had to follow suit. I'm just saying the Celtics didn't have to be that team that basically shakes up the draft. There wasn't a need to. You had enough picks in the draft to get any of the players that you wanted to. You get the best players possible that's going to give you, like you said, in the word that you used, flexibility. And flexibility, in my sense, is flexibility to be able to move that dude if you really feel like you can get something from him down the road that you couldn't execute through the course of draft or leading up to that draft.
Right. And that's what it boils down to, because you still don't know how it necessarily plays out if they do one thing. If you get done, then maybe it changes the whole draft. But look what Philly was able to do later on down the line. And then it allows them now. They like I said, they got two shooters and wing players who can really help them. Hey, that could have worked out for Boston too. You could have gotten Noel or Okafor to get a big who you really need one way or another. If you wanted Okafor to get your post-up presence and your scoring, or you could have gotten Noel to get the interior defense that you so desperately need.
Shaw, you know what I find very interesting? And again, this is just me thinking out loud here. I find it interesting that the Oklahoma City Thunder were fielding phone calls and were ready to move Serge Ibaka. You don't think that Serge Ibaka wouldn't be a viable piece for the Boston Celtics? And if the Oklahoma City Thunder wind up getting Domantas Sabonis, okay, if the Celtics have that third pick, you don't think the idea of maybe getting a Chris Dunn would be plausible for the Oklahoma City Thunder? I mean, they already have enough bigs. I'm sure that they could have easily put themselves in a position to get something that would have easily been an upgrade over Roberson if the idea was they were planning to get rid of Ibaka. And the Celtics, I still believe, they need to shore up that front court. That front court still does not prove to be a formidable front court going into this coming season and to be competitive on any level against any of the better teams that are in the Eastern Conference. So that's my problem. Like, it's like, okay, fine, you weren't going to do anything as far as being able to move out of that third pick. But the guy that you get is a positional player that you've already pretty much given security to by having Jay Crowder. He's your more durable three guy. He's your more versatile defensive guy. So what was the point of getting Jaylen Brown anyway?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. And hopefully Brown does develop and Boston has made the right decisions. My issue isn't even so much with Brown as opposed to what they could have did with that third pick. It's stuff that they did later on, especially at 16. Getting the French Draymond Green, as some people are calling him. He's probably going to be a stash pick. That to me is just very, very peculiar because he's somebody who you didn't have to draft at 16. He would have been there later on in the first round and probably even in the second round. And that's to me where Ainge really kind of, lost this draft, if you will. He got the Croatian center, Zizek. And I like him and I like what I've seen from him on tape, whatever like that. So that was probably his best pick, but it sucks when you have 3 picks in the first round. Your best pick actually came at 23. Not to say that Jaylen Brown is not going to develop. It's just that they had so many other things in play, with that pick, and that you thought that they could have probably used that to do something else later on down the line. I just feel like Ainge got a little bit short-sighted, but nevertheless, again, we're not in the draft room. We don't know all the things that were happening. But from the outside looking in, it does look a little bit suspect.
A little suspect? It looks skittish. I mean, suspect, again, you're being nice, Shaw. Enamored, suspect, skittish. That's my terminology, skittish. Anyway, all right, Shaw. So amongst that, we broke down, the first, second, and third picks, obviously, okay? When you look up and down, number 5, because we already mentioned Phoenix Suns getting Dragan Bender, the Timberwolves getting Chris Dunn, Pelicans at number 6 getting Buddy Hield. And to me, I really like this because I think everybody knew that Eric Gordon's time is up with the Pelicans. They need to get better and they need to get younger. When I say younger, I mean Hield is a seasoned guy. He's already in his 20s. But this guy and his ability to shoot the basketball, I like a lot better with that rotation. Maybe this time around, the Pelicans might actually look a little bit like the team they were a couple of years ago with having a guy like Buddy Hield. I'm not saying he's, instantly going to be there, but if Davis can stay healthy, They're going to lose a couple of players, but I like the fact that they're actually looking at, hey, we want a pure shooting guard type of guy like Buddy Hield could come in, really space the floor. I thought this was a great pick for the Pelicans at number 6.
Yeah, it was a smart pick. As you mentioned, Gordon is probably on his way out the door. Ryan Anderson might be on his way out the door too. So they don't have any type of real shooting on that roster. Holiday is an acceptable shooter, but Tyreek isn't really a knockdown type of guy. Nobody else on that roster really permeates, when it comes to stroking the ball, especially from beyond the three-point line. So Hield was the best player available for them. It really kind of was a no-brainer for them at 6, and I think he's going to be a nice fit. They're already talking about Buddy in the Brow, as kind of the marketing campaign. I think it's going to be a nice look for the New Orleans Pelicans coming up this season.
I can definitely see some children's storybooks happening here with Buddy in the Brow.
That's nice.
Crazy. All right, the Denver Nuggets at number 7. You knew that at some point the Knicks would be in conversations that would rear its ugly head about them giving up the house for Carmelo Anthony. So the Denver Nuggets, they wind up getting Jamal Murray out of Kentucky. How are you feeling about this? Because I think the Denver Nuggets obviously are trending in the right direction. They're getting younger. The one thing that does concern me, though, is that for a first-round pick, they already went and they have Moutier. So now with them getting Murray, how long are we talking about the development process for Jamal Murray to have an impact for the Denver Nuggets? Or are we talking about the Denver Nuggets possibly making some moves so that they can open this up a little bit more? Because, again, we talk about how, you get potential and you draft potential, but at some point these guys have got to have an opportunity to play for us to be able to believe that they're going to be able to have an impact on a team like the Denver Nuggets.
No, they did a good job here. I think, getting the next best shooter, same thing. They need shooting on this roster, to kind of help Gallinari from the outside, and then also to take away from, the ineptitude of Moutier from the arc and, from mid range as well too. So Murray and Moutier will play together, I think, a lot at times too. They ended up getting Wade Baldwin down the line. I think later on, not Wade Baldwin. Who did they end up drafting? They got
Juan Hernan Gomez.
Yeah, and Malik Beasley from Florida State, another guy who can shoot the basketball. So they're definitely trying to shore up the backcourt position and make sure they get some shooting out there to complement Moutier and some of their bigs. But I've been saying it online. I think they're going to get rid of one of their itches. The Nurkic or Jokic. One of those guys are probably going to get moved because they have a lot of guys on this roster kind of in that young talent frame and you're right, they all can't play. Remember, Gary Harris is still there. Wilson Chandler is going to be coming back from an injury, and he's going to be looking for his minutes. And obviously, we already talked about Gallinari as well. So I think Denver is going to be very, very active in the offseason, trying to move a couple pieces to maybe try to get an upgrade of some sort of superstar.
Yeah, Denver's definitely trying to scratch that ick that they've got, that itch that they got going on right now. So clearly, something's going to happen during the course of the offseason. Shaw, the Phoenix Suns, Marquise Chris from out of Washington. Again, and we're going to probably talk about, I'm pretty sure you're probably going to have the Phoenix Suns as one of your top 3 teams as winners tonight in their draft selections. But what do you make of Marquise Chris coming in at number 8 for the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, that's a trade that they did with Sacramento. So Sacramento made the selection for them, and then in a deal where Sacramento ended up moving down. So they get Chris and Bender. 2 guys who they can really come in now and be those stretch fours. And they can even give Chris some time to develop. I think Bender will be plugged in immediately right away to play alongside Alex Len, and then Chris will probably come off the bench or vice versa. We don't know. But I think it's more than an acceptable move for Phoenix.
So do you think it's inconceivable that the Phoenix Suns might be looking to figure out a way to, because I think a lot has been asked, and I think maybe like a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month ago, Tyson Chandler was on ESPN, and he was discussing on if the organization is looking to do the right things to actually put together a team that's going to be competitive. He wants to stay. He wants to help coach up these young guys. But given that the Phoenix Suns have been done what they've done right now in this draft selection with Bender and then also with Chris, are we probably foreseeing that the Phoenix Suns are going to look for a way to move Tyson Chandler?
They might, and it's just a matter of what type of role he's willing to accept. And, from a Watson standpoint, what is he trying to do? Is he trying to develop the young guys, or are they trying to win, or do they feel like, can they do both? And I think that's a conversation that the organization needs to have, with Tyson Chandler. I think at this stage of his career, he's probably too proud and doesn't necessarily want to come off the bench. But I think you got to let Len go out there and get those minutes if possible. Let Bender and Chris play now as well too. Hopefully, you keep Bledsoe and Knight healthy, and so that they can be a dynamic backcourt. And see if you can make a run at a playoff position in the Western Conference. But we'll see.
Yeah, Alex Len coming on strong in the second half of the season. Are you buying now into Alex Len? I mean, are you buying? Well, let me put it like this: are you buying into Alex Len being that guy for Phoenix as much as you are buying into Alex Len being successful in the NBA?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because Tyson Chandler is, how many years does he really have left? He's a pros pro, great locker room guy, and he can still go out there and rebound and do all of those things too. But I think if you're trying to build, Len is the guy that you're trying to build around and see what he can do in the very very near future, and that I mean by next year and beyond. So yeah, I like how Len has developed, and I think they need to continue to do just that.
All right, Shaw. So since we've gone ahead and there's two other players that I just want to get your perspective from in the top 10. Toronto Raptors selecting Jakob Poeltl from Utah, and the Milwaukee Bucks selecting Thon Maker. So when you look at how this has rounded itself off from the top 10 perspective, who are your winners and who are your losers?
Well, I think his name is Jakob Poeltl.
Jakob, I'm sorry, not Jacob.
Yeah, and it's all good that's a nice move for Toronto, especially if they're losing Bismack Biyombo. Poeltl can come in there now and definitely fill that role and play behind Valanciunas as well. Thon Maker, I think, is the biggest shock of any selection in the top 10, even more so than Jaylen Brown at 3. Because Maker was anywhere in the late 20s to somewhere in the second round. And just to see that Milwaukee, and John Hammond, who was a guy and friend of the show, made that selection, it was just a little bit perplexing, I think, for me. But they like length. They like guys who are active, and he is all of those things too. He's a little bit older and more mature, so he can maybe go in there and play right away in Jason Kidd's system. But I just was surprised to see him go as high as he did. But if you're looking at it, I mean, outside of the top two, because those are the top two guys in general, I think Phoenix probably had the best draft because they got two guys in the top 10. And that's something Philly were trying to do, and they weren't able to get it done. So Philly, getting Bender and Marquise Chris, I think, had the best draft in the top 10 guys, top 10 players.
All right, and your losers, even though it might have already been answered, but who do you think who's been the biggest loser? Out of the top 10, or at least they didn't address their need within the top. If they had a top 10 selection, they didn't really address the need to help better the team as much as it was just getting the best player that they thought that was on the board.
Right. I think, and again, that goes back to Boston, because Boston's, weakness is that they have no shooting and they have no interior presence. Then they get a guy, Jaylen Brown, who is still working on his shot. Yeah, he can play a little bit of defense, or, at least so they hope. But I think to me, that's they're the biggest loser. And then we just talked about Milwaukee getting Thon Maker at 10. Again, he's a project who I would have loved for other teams to take later on in the first round, or again early in the second. If you get him there, that's extremely great value. Like a guy like Deontay Davis going 31, I think that was amazing. But yeah, to me, Boston and Milwaukee took the biggest risk with their top 10 selections.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal, Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our coverage of the NBA draft 2016. Interesting names, interesting selections, and more importantly, interesting moves that were made leading up to the draft. Be sure to check out my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. All right, Shaw. So now let's just look at it, from 11 on down. Give me your perspective of guys that you really felt like, interesting guys, where they've been selected, where they've been placed within that first round, that you say to yourself, they're definitely in a good situation and have an opportunity to make some noise with the team that selected them.
Well, if we're looking from, basically 11 to 20, I think Denzel Valentine is probably, one of the best selections, I think, in that mantra, if you will, in that role. Going at 14 to Chicago, he's going to have an opportunity to play immediately. Whether or not he's coming off the bench or starting, don't necessarily know that just yet. But I definitely feel like Valentine is a pros pro, and somebody who we talked about on our draft show, who I was really high on. Especially for, he was being projected anywhere between, 12 to 23. And he goes really kind of in the middle of that, going at 14 to Chicago. I like that selection for them and what they're able to do. I think Memphis did a great job, too, getting Wade Baldwin at 17. Can go in there and back up Mike Conley if he's able to stay, or he might become the starter if Conley ends up leaving. I think that's a great selection. Henry Ellison go to Detroit Pistons. Yeah, I don't think they had much of a choice. You know what? That's a guy who space the floor, can spell Drummond and play alongside Drummond if necessary because he can shoot the basketball and he can rebound as well too. So those are my top three. I think in that realm. Also, like the pick that the Brooklyn Nets did, getting Karis LeVert from University of Michigan. Guys had some injuries, but he's definitely a scorer. And if they're going to be in that new direction now where they know they're going to be heading to the lottery again, LeVert's a guy who can come there and get some plus minutes and really develop as long as he can stay healthy. I think that was a good selection for them as well.
I got to tell you, I like the selection of the Sacramento Kings getting Malachi Richardson. And you had an opportunity to interview Malachi, a very, very tempered person, very poised, and he sounds like someone that's ready to play. I think that the Kings failed in their experiment with Ben McLemore. Clearly they cannot play goodness, he's losing I'm losing him. They're starting their starting shooting guard, no.
Rondo Collison.
No. Goodness gracious.
Well, McLemore started. Bellinelli was traded.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. They had Bellinelli for a period of time, and then ultimately they had to run back McLemore out there. But I'm just saying, like, to me, McLemore, I don't see him fitting. Even with the new direction that they're going to wind up going in, I don't see him fitting. I really see Malachi Richardson showing a lot of versatility, and he has a great opportunity, I think, to come in there and do something for the Sacramento Kings. If given the chance, I think he can do some things. I think he could definitely, and no matter what happens with Rajon Rondo, whatever the case may be, I just feel like Malachi Richardson has an opportunity to kind of fly under the radar and really have an impact with the basketball team. And you're still playing against arguably the best big man in the game in Boogie Cousins. He has some play that right there. What I find interesting is number 25 with the Clippers and them selecting Bryce Johnson. I feel like Bryce Johnson is probably the most slept on front court player on the back end of the draft pick selections. And it's interesting that the Clippers went ahead and selected him, because I would have thought that somewhere along the line, the Clippers would have tried to figure out a way to maybe bump themselves up and address the shooting guard situation. You're probably not going to have Jamal Crawford. If you're going to tell me you're going to just sit on your laurels on the idea of having Redick and maybe Austin Rivers playing off of that two situation, but he's going to be the primary point guard, I still think you need to address that shooting situation. And then how many more times is the Los Angeles Clippers going to keep selecting North Carolina guys and I guarantee you something's going to happen and Bryce Johnson's no longer going to be a Los Angeles Clipper. He's probably going to get moved somewhere because they love selecting him, but they just can't figure out a way to keep him on the basketball court.
I mean, I think that's very interesting because Johnson is, another high character guy, someone who can come in there, block shots, can run the floor a little bit. He can shoot mid-range jumper some and space the floor some, from that 4 and 5 position. I think he's going to fit in nicely. I definitely agree with you, too, that they probably do need some help, but I think they feel like Crawford is somebody that they will potentially be able to retain. But they also need some help on, at the 3 position. Really, that's been a hole for them for the last maybe 2 or 3 seasons. So that's somewhere that I think they could have, figured some things out. But they made some selections in the second round too as well. So that I think they're going to try to maybe evaluate some of those guys. And again, there's still free agency for them. But Bryce Johnson was a nice pick at 25, nice value. Again, they could have went with Korkmaz from Turkey, who just won a selection later at 26 at Philadelphia. But again, I think Johnson fits what they need too as well. So they have a lot of needs, and again, they could have won either way.
All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and shift our attention now to the granddaddy of them all, because don't nobody care about the first round, right? Don't nobody want to talk about them players from the first round. We just talked about the first rounders all too much. What we want to talk about is them second rounders. Why we want to talk about them second rounders? Because you will always find a diamond in the rough. You will always find that one dude who everybody just basically looks past. They overlook him. They're not talking about him. And then all of a sudden, they become your Draymond Green. All of a sudden, they become your Chandler Parsons. All of a sudden, they become a significant cog to what's driving us to having these conversations about when the time comes and they come out of their rookie contract. Are these guys deserving of max money? Are these guys deserving to get that long-term deal? So, Shaw, when you look up and down in that second round, who is it that stands out to you in saying, you know what? This guy, this is a second round selection that's going to come out with first round first round applause or praise because of his gameplay. No one's looking at this dude. This guy's going to be sneaking in and is going to be wreaking havoc in the NBA very shortly.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of guys. I think when you look at all the people that were selected, I think Zubac going at 32, Deontay Davis at 31, and then Celtics inexplicably training him to Memphis. Davis is guy, high character guy. Same thing. Went to Michigan State. So Izzo is a guy who developed him, and I think he's somebody who can really have have a nice career in the NBA. I don't know if I'm looking at it right now and saying, okay, any of these guys are going to be your Jimmy Butlers, for lack of a better phrase, keep using that reference. Someone's going to come out here now all of a sudden, or Chandler Parsons from a few seasons ago, and you're like, oh wow, this guy really, really did his thing. I just think there's a lot of rotational guys and guys who can help. But I wouldn't go much further than 31 and 32 with those two guys, Davis and Zubac. Zubac might come over to the Lakers this year and be an acceptable player. And then even when you let out the show with Ben Bentil, I think he's somebody maybe later on, maybe we're like, oh, how did he get this far? Not to stick with the Celtics picks, if you will, but Demetrius Jackson too at 45, I think it was. He's somebody who I think could really help out. George Yang from Ohio State, he goes to Indiana. Somebody else who could potentially be a nice player down the road. And Marcus Page, I think someone too who can help out. But I don't know if I'm looking at any real stars in this right now. I just think you're going to see these guys prove to be a little bit more valuable when they were drafted.
One person that I am going to be looking at, and it's the person that that Ed Isaacson had made mention of, was Isaiah Whitehead, and how interesting it was that Isaiah Whitehead was going to be selected by the Utah Jazz, and then the Brooklyn Nets trade to get Isaiah Whitehead. And to me, he's a guy that has an opportunity to stand out more than anything. Now Thaddeus Young's no longer there. You still only have Robin Lopez. This is Brooklyn, man. I mean, next to New York, it ain't the Mecca, but you can definitely make it like the Mecca with the way that he plays his game. Remember, he's still, he's a part of the Telfair Marbury clan. And to me, he has an opportunity. He has an opportunity to play like he's a first round draft pick in a city that's going to be clamoring for a showstopper. And he has that upside to be able to do that.
Yeah, I like that. I think he's somebody who can go in there and really compete for that job. The point guard situation is pretty shady.
It's up in the air. You're going to tell me that Jarrett Jack is going to be your point guard?
Jack is gone.
There you go.
He's a free agent. There's a possibility he returns, but right now, in theory, he has to beat out Shane Larkin and Donald Sloan. So I think he's got a pretty good shot at doing either one of those things too. So
and no disrespect to Larkin. He's from the U, and I love him, but he's had his chances, man.
But he's not that dude. So I think Whitehead definitely has an opportunity. I think that's a great selection for somebody who could stand out immediately going into next season, because he's going into a ready-made situation where he can really compete for a job and has a real opportunity to win that job and maybe even be a starter.
Yeah, definitely, right? Who else I kind of like that I think might also help? I don't know why. I feel like he's like he's like the like that third Morris twin that no one's ever going to talk about, but Michael Benji. He to me, like the performance that he put on for Syracuse, I can't see where Stan Van Gundy does not figure out a way to get this guy in the rotation. I just really feel like, him, Johnson, Stanley Johnson, Morris, they're going to have bodies to throw out. They're going to have flexibility to throw out. At 49, it'll be hard pressed. I don't know where the minutes are going to come from, but I feel like if he figures out a way to maximize his opportunity on the basketball court, he can definitely help out this Pistons team that's already on the come up, man.
Yeah, that is something that I think could definitely work. They still have KCP there, as you mentioned, Johnson, Tobias Harris there for a full season. So it'll be interesting to see where he actually gets his minutes. Don't know what's going on with the Jody Meeks situation, because he's supposed to still be there too. Don't know if they're going to try to move on from him. It will be hard for him to get minutes, I think, if all those guys return or if the Pistons don't make another move. But I think for the value, second round, non-guaranteed contract, I think they did a great job there getting a guy from Syracuse. But
all right, now, so winners and losers overall, Shaw. Who is the biggest winner, in this draft, and then who really ultimately is the biggest loser?
I think the biggest winner overall to me is Indiana and Philadelphia. I just think they did the most to help their teams, and Indiana didn't really do it by getting any draft selection. It was getting by making trades, through the draft. But I think for me, that really is proof positive of the direction that they want to go. And again, as it was mentioned, Philadelphia getting, three guys who can really come in there and really play, immediately. I really like that in general. And then, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say the Celtics are probably the biggest losers, having 8 picks, only making 6 of them, trading 2 of them, and then one of them, which they're trading, was a guy who they really could have used and potentially use next season, in Deontay Davis. To me, they are the biggest loser of the draft by far, far, far and away. Also, again, going back to winners, I love what the Spurs were able to get, giving Deontay Murray, from Washington now to come there. On some people's board, he was, a lottery selection, maybe even top 10 by Chad Ford's account of ESPN. They got him at 29. So the Spurs and Warriors, I think they did really good for where they were. And that's kind of where I would end it. As far as another loser, I don't necessarily know if I like everything Orlando did. Like I said, going back to that trade in general, and obviously Milwaukee with Thon Maker.
All right. Well, I think, who you emphasize as your biggest winners and losers. I'm gonna leave it at that. We don't need to complicate our fans with too much. But I will give you the biggest gas face tonight. Gas face galore. I haven't done a gas face in quite some time. But the biggest gas face goes to Deontay Davis from Michigan State. I don't know if whether or not you saw what transpired with this dude. I understand. I understand. He was disappointed that he was projected to be a first round, a lottery pick, basically, and he fell all the way down to the 31st pick in the second round. But his whole demeanor, his whole attitude through the course of that whole situation, to me, and I tweeted this out, if I'm a GM, man, I'm glad my blank check was stuck in my pocket with this dude, because that right there could have been the very reason why you fell as quickly and as hard as you did. You just cannot do that, man. You cannot act like you need a pacifier when the camera is on your face and you are being considered one of the top picks and you don't get where you feel like you need to be. That to me is, and listen, if I'm Deontay Davis, I relish in the fact that 30 teams have basically skipped on what I'm capable of bringing at, and now I come in with fire and brimstone, and add on the fact that it's the Memphis Grizzlies of all teams that trade you, who are clearly going to need a new power forward and a new center position, backup center, or whatever the case may be. You have an opportunity to have an instant impact and get a crazy playing time. To me, my boy straight up, man, he just straight up played himself with the way that he carried himself in front of the camera, the way that he carried himself in that interview with Lisa Salters. Just a big, big, big no-no. Gas face galore to Deontay Davis. And I can't believe I'm saying that about a Michigan State player.
Well, I understand that too. And all you can say is, he's young. So, he didn't really know how to handle himself in that situation, being disappointed.
Man, if my mom would have pulled him by the ear and smacked it, boy, you better act like you want to be in this thing.
And he should have. That was definitely a mistake on his part. And if you're the Memphis Grizzlies, you got to be like, well, damn, hey, what kind of guy we're getting here? But I'm sure he's going to turn it around. And if you take away the tone and the demeanor in which he was saying things, what he was saying was that, hey, listen, he said, what, it's not about where you get drafted. It's about, not going out there and playing and proving it. And he's saying he's going to have a chip on his shoulder, as many guys say that they are, especially if they slip in the draft. And hopefully he goes up now and he lives up to it. So Memphis Grizzlies getting Davis there, from the Boston Celtics, huge tragedy for Boston, not keeping that pick there. But Memphis gets a good one. I think that they're going to be able to develop, and he's going to get to learn behind Gasol and Zebo. So I think that's awesome for him as well too. So once he gets all that kind of in his head, I think you'll see his tone change a little bit.
Most definitely, man. Most definitely. All right, man. So wrapping this up, man. Awesome discussion. A lot of names to throw out there. Some will automatically, be under our tongue in cheek because we roll right ahead into Summer League. And clearly we're going to be keeping our eye on some of these talents that are going to have an opportunity to give themselves a chance to possibly make the roster. I mean, obviously we know the first round draft picks, these guys are guaranteed. The second rounders, they're going to be playing, to be a part of an NBA team. And I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on some guys that I felt were very much deserving to be drafted. They didn't get drafted. And some of these guys that did get selected, whether they were first round, second round, whether or not they're going to find themselves in the heat of conversations when it comes to making rosters and being a part of a steadfast rotation.
Well, I love, having this opportunity to have to discuss the draft. And again, like you said, a lot to be discussed as we move forward. Summer League, free agency right around the corner. And yeah, you're going to see, there's already guys being signed, as we speak, as we record this show, people who didn't get drafted, signing 1-year deals or non-guaranteed money and opportunities to play in the Summer League and all that too. So the NBA circle continues to go right around. We're right here with you, but another great show with you, my dude. And, again, this NBA draft, although it shocked me, it still was a good one, especially if you're a fan watching in, because there was a lot of intrigue and a lot of twists and turns along the way.
Most definitely. So we appreciate you and yours again for supporting the Baseline NBA podcast as we continue to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the NBA. Be sure to download any one of the platforms that our show is available on. We're available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, Microsoft TuneIn. We're also available on Google Music. And then my man Shaw Sports Net is available on the Roku channel. So if you have a Roku box, head over to the marketplace, look for Shaw Sports, and you can capture and listen to the Baseline NBA podcast, always being uploaded, always made available for you and yours. We encourage you to download and discuss. We also encourage you to give us a rating as we continue to climb up the charts, discussing all of the hot button topics and being the best of the best in NBA podcasting discussions. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Hope you enjoyed NBA Draft 2016. And be sure to check out the next installment of the Baseline NBA podcast. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. And we'll catch up with you next time.